A crane operator in the late 1900s was pulling a double shift at the local steel mill in Mansfield, Ohio. He worked in the tempering mill. The tempering mill was made up of open hearth furnaces, pits in the ground that were kept at 800 to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Coils of steel were placed in the furnaces by the cranes to be brought up to temperature for finishing. The top of one of the furnaces was open, as it was the one the operator was pulling hot coils out of. As the operator turned back to the open pit, he saw an employee tumble into the furnace. The operator made a split-second decision to try to save the other man as he ran around the bottom of the pit in search of an escape. Lowering the crane boom into the pit to give the man something to grab onto, he tried to hold on and save himself. As the crane operator watched, the skin of his arms fell away as he succumbed to the heat. Horrified, he watched helplessly as the other man ran around the furnace one more time before curling up in the fetal position at the bottom of the pit, dead. Welcome to A&A's Tall Tales. I'm Andrea.
And I'm Amanda.
We are covering AK Steel Mansfield, now Cleveland Cliffs.
That was a very depressing intro.
It's a true story. It happened sometime in the late 1900s, so 1975 to 1980. It's a story that's told out at the steel mill fairly regularly, and it's part of their training videos and things, so it's pretty gruesome.
Insanely depressing and awful, and I know you're excited for this one, but I'm gonna be depressed for a little bit.
No, don't be depressed. I don't know the man's name. There's a couple of different names that are told with this story. Either way, it wasn't that long ago, and I would rather not say, so.
That's fair.
Yeah, the local steel mill here, it's been passed around quite a bit in the last 100 years. It's a huge and integral part of our community here. Its history is extremely fascinating, but there's also some very spooky tales out there. As you can imagine, it's a very, very dangerous job.
Yeah.
The mill itself sits on 548 acres with 1.6 million square feet of manufacturing space. It was built between 1908 and 1909. I have a ton of really cool fun facts to go with this. One of the cool facts that I have is the 548 acres that the plant sits on was actually bought from Henry Ford. So there's a lot of swampy area in between the steel mill property and Richland County Correctional Institute. Apparently, back in those swampy areas are old Model Ts from the Ford plant that were used to just try to fill in some of the swampy areas to make them useful.
So we need to go magnet fishing?
I'm going to guess that before 1908 to now, so over 100 years, I'm going to guess that if there's any truth to that they probably don't really exist anymore. But I thought it was really cool.
I'm going to dream that I can just magnet fish a fully functional showroom quality Model T out of that swamp.
I mean, and it's even cool right now to do the rust patina and stuff on these rat rods and things, so it wouldn't even have to be showroom quality to be cool.
Anything out of that swamp that's been sitting there for 100 years is not going to be in good shape at all.
No, if it hasn't completely rusted away. I mean, they call this part of the manufacturing in America the Rust Belt for a reason. So another cool thing about AK Steel Mansfield, I gotta quit saying AK Steel Mansfield. It's now Cleveland Cliffs, and it has been for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years now. So another cool thing about Cleveland Cliffs Mansfield is everybody in America and many people throughout the world use something with Mansfield steel in it at least once a day.
Which, when I learned that, I was slightly surprised that the steel coming from this plant is so widely used in different things. Especially being a vet tech, I'm not practicing anymore like on the clinic floor, but hypodermic needles, you said, were one of the things, and so we use those on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, any American manufactured hypodermic needles, scalpel blades are all from Mansfield. Every Cutco knife is made from Mansfield steel,
I have a couple of those sitting in a drawer.
right? 95% of all vehicles on the road in the United States have steel from Mansfield in some shape or form. They produce all of the stainless steel, or most of the stainless steel, for Toyota. Ferrari is actually, to my knowledge, the only mass-produced vehicle company that does not use steel from the Mansfield steel plant. So unless you're driving around in a Ferrari, and if you are, pics or it didn't happen, all Leatherman knives and multi-tools are made from steel from Mansfield plant. All of the stainless steel in GE and Whirlpool appliances, Mansfield. Gorman Rupp uses steel from Mansfield in all of their pumps. A lot of Gerber knives are made with Mansfield steel. And this is all because Mansfield, Ohio makes the best 4000 series stainless steel. They don't know why. There's something about the location of the Mansfield plant that even when the same process and chemistry is replicated in other areas, the quality of the steel simply cannot be met anywhere else. To the point, as story has it, Toyota, who orders all of their steel from Mansfield, was given steel from a different plant within the AK Steel Holding Company. It was wrapped and marked as if from Mansfield. During the testing process, which every coil that they get goes through, Toyota ascertained that the steel was not from Mansfield. The quality was not what they expected. They returned the coils, they refused them, and told the steel company that they would not accept steel from anywhere other than Mansfield, or they would find somewhere else to get it.
Damn. I kind of have a joke about it's in the water because there's a joke about New York bagels, even if you use the same recipe, not tasting the same because it's New York water. So,
you know what? I wonder if it has something to do with the Model Ts that are fermenting back there in the swamp.
The Model Ts or all the ghosts give it flavor. It's very morbid. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. So those are some of the cool facts. If you're in America, if you use any of those products, yeah, you are using steel from Mansfield.
Yeah, my last car was Toyota. I own a couple Leatherman knives. I'm like
right?
Almost 100% perfect on that list.
It's incredible. As I was talking to some of the guys out there, I did not realize that. My brother's been a huge resource for me as well, so I thought it was amazing. Another really interesting thing with the steel mill is over the last 100 years, it has gone through 10 different names and companies.
Huh.
So in 1908, 1909, it opened initially as the National Sheet Steel Company. It very quickly was changed to the National Rolling Mill Company. Extremely shortly after that, as in by 1914, it was purchased by W.H. Davy and Brothers as the National Rolling Mill Company and quickly was changed to the Mansfield Sheet and Tin Plate Company. W.H. Davy and Brothers played a huge role in building Mansfield as we know it. They expanded the company in 1916 by selling $300,000 worth of stocks. That's a lot of money now, but in 1916, as we've talked about, I feel like, again, every episode, it was a staggering amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
In 1919, they had done $20 million in business since 1914. They were predicted to do another $10 million in 1920 alone. During the steel strike of 1919, the company continued without losing a single employee.
Wow.
They, however, did not make their $10 million quota.
Yeah, but even then, not losing a single employee, because that was a huge strike.
It was a huge strike, and it shut down other companies and other franchises, for lack of a better word, permanently. So for them to not lose a single man, and they still made money that year, I couldn't find an actual statistic anywhere, which, I mean, I guess that's not even really important. But they chose to take care of their workers and hunker down, and they made it through it remarkably well. By 1927, after the strike of 1919, they continued on. And in 1927, the company merged with 6 others and became Empire Steel. The Lincoln Highway, which is also now known as Route 30, came through in 1913, by the way. It connected the nation from east to west and allowed the steel from Mansfield to be taken throughout the country by truck as well as by train. Most of the steel is moved by train out there even today. The plant's surrounded by tracks and it has its own dedicated loading dock that's enormous. AK Steel, which is in my lifetime what the steel mill has been for up until I believe the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, was known as AK Steel. So it was a result of a merger between Armco, which is the American rolling mill company, and Empire Detroit. And that happened in 1999. As that switch was made over from Armco to Empire Detroit, the contract with the union employees came up. So it was done. And AK Steel entered into a nearly 3.5 year, 40 months long lockout and contractual fight that put 620 union employees out of work for that time. That was the last time there was a lockout at the plant, but it rocked our community here.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I mean, you're talking a multi-billion-dollar business, and they were fighting over, they wanted to dock employees' pay by $1. They wanted to start charging them like $500 to $600 a month for healthcare. And it wasn't small changes, and it was awful. The lockout began on September 1st, 1999, and went to November of 2002. And it was between the United Steelworkers Local 169 Union and Armco Steel / AK Steel. They locked out 620 employees, and I found anything from 620 to 600 to 500 employees. But it was a large amount of men and women. They brought in 250 replacement scab workers to run the mill. So they replaced 600 workers with 250. This, understandably, when you start messing with people's way of life and the way they make their money and feed their family, it caused extreme violence. They did not take it laying down.
I mean, I can only imagine, because Mansfield I don't think of as a poorer community, but I also don't think of them as German Village or Upper Arlington down here in Columbus.
Right.
You're not going to do anything else, really, if you don't work at the steel mill. Like, there's nothing else to employ that many people.
At that time, there was General Motors in Ontario, and there were still several large factories. In fact, in 2000, Mansfield was ranked the 5th top best place in the country to raise a family.
I feel like that's so different from today.
It is, and it's not. But part of the reason is the steel mill. On an average year, so not even a good year, an average year, the mill produces over 600,000 tons of steel. So that's 1.2 billion pounds of steel per year. And this is the smallest steel plant in the AK Steel Cleveland Cliffs franchise, so to speak.
The smallest?
Yes. It's the smallest, and it's the oldest. It doesn't have any of the high-tech stuff that the other plants have. In fact, one of the furnaces is powered by a generator off of a 1950s submarine. So you want to talk about some ghosts?
Yeah, just a little bit.
It was off of a decommissioned World War II submarine. They brought the generator in, and it is still running to this day. I believe, and I'm pulling this completely off the top of my head, so I'm really sorry, guys, if I got it wrong. This 1950s generator has only been shut down a handful of times since it was installed in the 1950s. And one of those times was during the peak of the coronavirus pandemic in 2020.
That's impressive.
Isn't that cool?
That something from the 1950s can just run like that.
Talk about they don't make stuff like they used to anymore.
Seriously.
Okay, some of the violence that went on out there, and this pertains and leads into some of the spooky stories and personal experiences I've gathered. December 6, 1999, a threat was phoned into a trucking company, warning them to stop hauling for AK Steel. Later that day, the trucking company was the target of a drive-by shooting. December 15th, 1999, S&S transport trucks were bombed in the driveway of the operator's home. It was strongly suspected that it was linked to the lockout at AK Steel Mansfield, as they hauled scrap steel for the company. December 10th, 2000, union member was arrested for dropping jack rocks, which are bent nails that are wrapped around and or welded together, in front of the plant. They would throw them out with the purpose of ripping up tires and causing damage to trucks and vehicles. So they dropped those in front of the plant and were arrested for it. Also for the bombing of the mailbox in a truck of a Luntz Company employee. Surprise, surprise, the Luntz Company supplied AK with scrap steel. December 13th, 2000, the police took a saliva sample from a local 169 member to try to match to an unburned cigarette found in 2 unexploded firebombs on September 25th, 2000. The sample was negative. December 17th, 2000, AK Steel takes out a full-page ad with the headline reading, "Help End the Terrorism," in 3-inch letters, with a picture of a mail bomb, and the company offered a $100,000 reward for information on anyone putting bombs on the company property.
Well, I mean, this is what happens when you put like 600 plus people out of work.
Over something ridiculous.
It's awful, but
I pulled a page out of your book. I started doing some research, and then my legal training started to kick in, and I ended up reading a whole debriefing at the 107th Congress held in Washington, D.C. with all about AK Steel. So I'm going to get to that here in a second.
I'm so proud of you.
Right?
Welcome to the dark side.
Oh my goodness, I got into this like you would not believe. Because it's a huge part of the community. It's a part, I have family members that work out there, and I have friends that work out there, and my friends' grandparents have worked out there. It's a huge deal, and it's very close to my heart, but it's also a really cool story. After the ad was taken out by AK Steel with the $100,000 reward, more than 50 union members from the local 169, which was the steelworkers union at the mill, the local 8530, which was from Ideal Electric, and the local 549, which was the auto workers union from Ontario, Ohio. All of these guys, all 50 plus of them, appeared in court in December 20th of 2000 on a variety of charges related to lockout violence. We have a local newspaper here in town, which has never had the best reputation in my lifetime, and I'm beginning to see why with all of this. So the Mansfield News Journal was extremely negative towards the union members through the whole ordeal. They sided with the company, they printed false information, and the retractions of that information were hidden in like the back pages of the newspaper. It was never covered by local media that AK agents allegedly threw jack rocks, the bent nails, in the union workers' parking areas, that their agents tried to run union protesters' vehicles off the road on several occasions, and on one occasion even tried to run one of the union bosses head-on into an oncoming semi. Around that same time frame, and I don't have an exact date or anything, an unknown person used a high-powered rifle to shoot out several transformers at the mill and disabled its running. So it was a huge deal. But the craziest thing happened in 2002. A Mansfield man, and I'm not even going to use his name because if you really want to know, you can go find it. I don't think he needs any kind of fame for this crap. A Mansfield man was arrested for plotting to launch homemade bombs at AK Steel Mansfield Works. The man was an employee of General Motors in Ontario, Ohio, so he wasn't even a steel worker, just a union brother. He was acting in sympathy for the locked-out union steel workers of the local 169. His plan was to build a rocket launcher, a homemade rocket launcher, and bomb the steel mill from the back of a pickup truck as he drove by. So obviously he couldn't do this on his own, and the only reason that he was caught is because he attempted to coerce an undercover ATF agent as an accomplice. Once he did that, they arrested him, and he admitted to building the rocket launcher in his garage and distilling alcohol into rocket fuel to propel it at the mill, all in his garage.
Okay. You are so smart to be able to do all of that, assuming that it works.
Right?
Terrorism is not your mode of action. Please do something better for society.
Well, so, and I'm going to get to that because remember, this was in 2002. It was in March of 2002. What happened in September of 2001?
That's true.
This man had enough rocket fuel and everything to launch 2 separate rockets as he drove by on Route 30 and planned to take a rifle with him as well to shoot at any police officers that might try to follow him. He planned to be, quote, a local warlord, end quote, because the scabs would be out of work then. He also went on to tell the ATF and the local police that no one would ever suspect anyone local of the bombing because of the recent September 11th terrorist attacks and the state that the country was in. I was in 6th grade at the time of all of that. I was trying to think back to what kind of state our country was in 6 months, not even 6 months after 9/11 happened. I do remember in Ohio, especially with the tank plant in Lima, Ohio, and some of the other, they were very concerned about bombings going on at those places or terrorist attacks going on at those places. So now
Mm-hmm.
when I read something like that, it sounds a little far-fetched and like what are you smoking, man? But if you think back to how it was in 2002, less than 6 months or just about 6 months after that actually happened, after 9/11 happened, we had just gone to war over all of this. We had just lost several thousand American lives to terrorist attacks. There had been several different terrorist attacks that had been stopped in the works and things. So it definitely, I think, made more sense at that time.
Yeah, if nobody was around or can really remember post 9/11, it's not even on the same scale as current pandemic situations, like the fear. Like,
Yeah,
even back when coronavirus first started, the fear and just the unease, we don't know what's going to happen, it's not even on the same level as post 9/11.
right.
We're talking a 10 of 9/11 versus a 4 of coronavirus. You couldn't walk out the door being a semi-Muslim looking person and not get hackled.
And when you're looking at the scope of, I don't know this as a fact, but if AK Steel makes the highest quality 4000 series stainless steel in the country, and one of the biggest builders of military vehicles is in Lima, Ohio, which is 2 hours from here by Route 30, it's not out of the park to suppose that Mansfield Steel was going to the tanks to be built for the war that had just begun.
Yeah.
Thinking about if the plant was at risk of a terrorist attack, it's not as far-fetched as it might seem just off the cuff that it would be a target. So now I feel like everything's super heavy. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh man. Moving on. As I said before, I got stuck reading like Amanda. She's a bad influence here, or good influence, however you look at it.
Sorry, not sorry.
I got looking into notes from the hearing before the Subcommittee on Employer-Employee Relations, House of Representatives, 107th Congress, second session, held in Washington, D.C. on September 26, 2002. The reason that I'm including these notes is because the whole lockout is still, to this day, with some of the old timers especially that experienced it and their families were put in hardship for it, a sore subject around here. And I'm not
Yeah.
sure that anybody else has been bored enough to actually read through 1,700 pages of a brief from the Congress. I found a couple of tidbits that this is just for you old timers, you guys that are still a little sore. In the year 2000, 10 members of the House of Representatives from the Ohio delegation urged AK Steel to accept the steelworkers' proposal and end the lockout through arbitration. AK Steel refused, flat out refused. By 2002, the representatives' requests were renewed to the steel company, and again it was rebuffed. In a federal RICO lawsuit, now, for those that do not know what RICO is, and the only reason I did is because I've worked for an attorney, RICO is an act that was passed in 1970. It's the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It's a federal law designed to combat organized crime in the United States, so keep that in mind. In a federal RICO lawsuit, AK Steel alleged in a 225-page complaint that the Steelworkers Union in Mansfield essentially conducted a massive criminal enterprise over 20 years of bargaining across several industries. So the company that bought the steel mill and locked these guys out then tried to say that the Steelworkers Union was organized
Can I
crime.
punch someone?
Right? Like, how ridiculous is that? Now, it gets better because the complaint was promptly dismissed by a federal district judge. And the reasoning
Good.
was it failed to satisfy even the first element of RICO. This is a quote. It failed to state a claim upon which relief can be granted. So what that means is in 225 pages of a complaint, not once did they say Here's the problem. This is the solution we're looking for. Okay, keep that in mind. The judge, this federal district judge, concluded that, quote, AK's allegations, though large in number and broad in scope, are unsupported by specific factual allegations. Basically, you're full of crap. Shut up and get out of my courtroom.
So they're getting picked on and told people, we don't want to pay you as much money, and oh, by the way, we also want to take more out of your paychecks.
Right.
And now we're getting picked on. Let's go cry to mommy / the court system, and the court system / mommy goes.
Not just the court system, the federal court system.
They're just like, yeah, you're full of shit, go away.
They went straight past mommy to grandma. Grandma was like, shut up and go sit in your room. Okay. The judge also recognized that unsubstantiated rhetoric, and those were her words, was a specialty of AK Steel, pointing out that AK Steel relies on vast quantities of conclusory, legalistic language to conceal the absence of well-pleaded factual allegations. That RICO lawsuit was a bunch of crap. Somebody spent a ton of time and paid some attorney somewhere enough money to write up a 225-page complaint. And a federal district judge was like, get out of my courtroom. So anyway.
This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
And that's what the judge said. She's like, this is ridiculous. Get out. So I figured anybody that was still feeling a little sore about any of that might get a kick out of realizing that even Congress and federal judges were like, guys, you're being unreasonable to the steel company. Believe it or not, we're getting to some of the spooky stuff here, I promise. The local mill is one of the safest mills that I could find. I did a lot of searching for accidents. I searched through OSHA records even. There's very few recent accidents pertaining to the actual production of steel. The most recent ones that happened were in 2020, go figure. In January of 2020, an explosion happened. And it actually burned a local woman severely, 2nd and 3rd degree burns across a lot of her body.
I remember this one because you were actually going to get a job there. I remember being extremely scared for her, but also thankful that that wasn't you.
Yeah, because I believe she was working the job that I would have been put into. Out of, again, just how recent this was in respect to her and her family. If you want names, you're going to have to look for them yourself.
And I hope she is doing well.
As far as I know, yes. There's been a lot of community support, and she has recovered a lot. Obviously not back to work. I don't know her personally. It's not something that, again, out of respect, even our local news sources don't hound. But there's been several community fundraisers and things, and she's doing as well as can be expected from what I understand. Good. And then the second incident that I found also happened in 2020 in December. So beginning of the year and the end of the year, there was a fire in the furnace in the melt shop and a crane operator was trapped. The firefighters were able to rescue the craneman and he was hospitalized for a short period of time for smoke inhalation and ultimately fully recovered.
He's lucky that that's all that happened.
Yeah, mostly because the scope of buildings there. I know I mentioned that it's the smallest plant in the chain of plants, but when I say that, I don't mean it's a small facility. This place is enormous.
We looked at Google Maps and pictures of the plant. Andrea came down, we baked some Christmas cookies. And
which I still have some left.
We're talking like the vents for this place, you could drive a semi-truck through them. And that's just the vents.
There's a really cool drone video that we found on YouTube that goes above the mill and around the mill and really shows a lot of the size, especially when you look at the full-size semi-trucks hauling scrap steel in, look like ants.
You don't even recognize them as semi-trucks. You're just like, oh, that's a really tiny car. And then you're like, wait, no, that's a semi.
So again, I might be slightly off. But the mill, the building is nearly a mile long. Wrap your mind around that. And it's anywhere, depending on the section of the building, it's anywhere from 5 to 7 stories tall. You're talking 100 to 130, I believe it was, or 135 feet tall. Just the enormity of it. And again, we've got pictures and things to pull up. I think we'll probably post the link to the YouTube video because it was really cool.
Oh, definitely.
And there's a section of the mill called the Old South End that was actually torn down back in the, I want to say 80s, late 70s, early 80s. So what stands now is only half of what the mill was.
Jeez.
Back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. I mean, it's 1.6 million square feet of manufacturing space. We'll put it that way. Oh, another cool fact, by the way, we keep talking about scrap steel. And I forgot to mention that part of that scrap steel, all the confiscated guns from local precincts are brought to the melt shop to be destroyed. Like, I don't know, I thought that was just...
Glad they're recycling.
Yeah. So the mill itself is enormous. It's been around for a very long time. Believe it or not, it weathered the Great Depression with remarkable stability somehow. In that time, between the 30s and the 40s and the onset of World War II, Mansfield actually held steady somehow. There's a section of town that even today we call Little Kentucky. And the reason for that is I came across this story, and I don't know how much truth there is to it, but I love it. Local legend says that there was a man named Otis Cummings at the Mansfield Plating Company, which was another industry in town, in the 1930s, that looked at one of his best workers and said, "If I could just have a dozen men like you." And that worker goes, "I have a whole passel of cousins where I come from, and they all need a job." So Mr. Cummins handed this man the keys to his Buick and said, "Well, go and get them then."
That's amazing.
Right? Like, I love this story. So that Buick drove across the Ohio River to Carter County, Kentucky. And let me tell you something, Carter County, Kentucky is spectacular. We trail ride down there. Go figure. We trail ride everywhere. So this guy, he drove from Roseland County, Ohio to Carter County, Kentucky. And at that point in time, the history of Olive Hill, Kentucky became inseparable from the history of Mansfield, Ohio. And even today, in a lot of ways, they're sister cities. I loved that particular story. And it's a pretty well-known local legend. So what happened is there is a section of Mansfield called the Roseland Area, and it originally was a 400-acre farm. In 1870, was owned by a man named William Hahn. It was a very profitable working farm for many years, but William Hahn was also a very influential businessman. He was very wealthy, and he, to the point where he rubbed elbows on a regular basis with congressmen, business owners, and he apparently even somehow helped President McKinley into office, to the point where the local country club was built next door to his farm. The steel mill was also built just a mile from his farm, and there was a neighborhood built for the steel workers called Bowman Heights. The steel mill is built on Bowman Road. And Bowman Heights was the initial neighborhood of, quote, Little Kentucky. In the 1920s, when Mr. Hahn died, his farm was broken into allotments. It slowly began to be built up for the steel workers. In the 1940s, when World War II broke out, it put factory production into overdrive in Mansfield. And the neighborhoods in those allotments in the Roseland area exploded like popcorn, is what a lot of these articles said. It gave me a really cool visual. In 1949, the city of Mansfield estimated that 500 houses had been built since 1945. So in 4 years, 500 homes built in the area west of the steel mill. And a lot of those homes, it was decades before they had city water and or sewage. So as late as the 1970s, a lot of them still had dirt floors and outhouses.
That's... wow.
Yeah. It also had a reputation of being a fairly rough side of town. And I remember even as a kid in the 90s, hearing some stories still. The one instance that I really found is there was a bar called Ralph's that had so many brawls happen that Mansfield Police Department wanted to shut it down. And the county prosecutor said no, because at least with Ralph's open, we know where all the troublemakers are and they're in one place and we can keep an eye on them. That's how bad it was. The stigma surrounding Little Kentucky, it really dissipated starting in the 1990s. Today, when you go drive past that side of town, it's a very beautiful area. It's been turned into a nice community. I'm sure it was always a decent community for the people that live there, but it has nothing left over from the outhouses and dirt floors. All these people came from Olive Hill, Kentucky. The reason being, the steel industry in America, so across the entire country, needed heat resistant bricks for their blast furnaces made from a certain type of clay. And that clay was found predominantly in the mountains surrounding Olive Hill, Kentucky, in Carter County. They made not just for the blast furnaces on steel mills, but also those bricks went into the fire boxes on steam engines. Unfortunately, for the brickyards in Carter County, at about the same time that the steel mill changed their methods of producing steel and no longer needed those bricks for their blast furnaces, trains also switched to diesel engines. So the brickyards were obliterated over the course of like 2.5 years, just became obsolete. And that's about the time that Otis Cummings sent his man down to Carter County and brought all of his cousins up to work here. Because at that time, production in Mansfield tripled in less than 5 years, and there were not enough people to work. So Richland County is about 4 hours from Carter County, Kentucky. It's a pretty easy drive straight up Route 23 and a couple of short turns, to the point where most of the men worked in Richland County during the week and went home to Carter County on the weekends. Mostly because Mansfield society was snobby. They were not very welcoming to outsiders. The way that Little Kentucky popped up, the section of town, there were several places I found that it was described as a section of Olive Hill. The land and everything around Olive Hill was cut out, looked like it was cut out, picked up, and placed down over Little Kentucky, Ohio. And it became basically a transplant of the town, and they kept to themselves. They did eventually integrate into both the community and businesses and local government. And like in my lifetime, anybody you talk to have relatives in Olive Hill and vice versa. But even to this day, many Mansfield-born descendants of Carter County, they will spend their careers working in Mansfield in Ohio. And when they retire, they move back home to Olive Hill. And I can't blame them. It's spectacular down there. All of that's going on. And the steel mill itself, there's some legends and there's some ghosts. Are we ready for ghosts?
I'm ready for ghosts. I'm always ready for ghosts. Come on
I know.
now.
I feel like I'm talking like completely on this one, but all of this information, probably 90% of it, I've pulled from local people. So I'm sorry that I have completely overtaken this whole episode.
That's fine. I figured that was what it was gonna be like, because I tried to do some research and then it just was, I couldn't find anything that you were talking about. And you're like, I got local people, I got this. I'm like, okay, I'll just shut up and let you talk.
For all of my like, oh, I'm shy, oh, I don't really like people that much, I love having an excuse to talk to people about their life experiences and hear their stories. It has been so much fun. And that is something I did not know about myself.
You found your newspaper addiction. Congratulations.
Apparently. I don't even know, but it's been so much fun. Okay, so the steel mill is old. Even the building, which is the new section, which is what is in production today, is still old. There are stories of back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, men operating out there while they were drinking, while they were partaking in certain 60s and 70s activities that are not legal, I believe, then or now.
You don't have to say this, but please don't drink and do the cannabis while you are working on a steel mill with heavy equipment and hot fires, please.
Yeah, there it was way more than cannabis in some cases that I heard.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, please don't, operate like that around 1800
Be
degrees
safe.
steel. But yeah, there was just some wild stories that I heard from these guys, and I'm not even going to admit how many pages of handwritten notes I have because I feel like a total dweeb. Anyway, there is a section of the mill that the the old timers, a lot of the guys that are out there still, don't like to go through. It's near a place called Door Zero. I don't actually know where that is. On a downturn, which is a skeleton crew. So it's just enough guys to clean up stuff, to do some maintenance. It's not a full crew. There's a crane inside the building, and it's about 100 feet tall off the ground. Remember when I was saying there's parts of this building that are 135 feet, 100, probably taller than that, honestly, in some
Hmm.
places. So there's a full crane 100 feet off the ground. The company safety guy, and not like the local company safety guy, like the big time safety guy for the whole company, not just this plant, all of them, was doing some inspections, equipment inspections, which are important to do. I mean, you have to have your equipment functioning when you're hauling around this kind of stuff. And this guy saw people up on the crane goofing off, but the crane's not accessible from the ground. And when they went and investigated, no one was up there. But he distinctly saw two people up on the crane. He, to this day, refuses to walk through that part of the building by himself. And
Hmm.
many of the old timers at the mill that have been there for a while refuse to walk through that part of the building on their own. Fortunately, that part of the building they use for the most part, if I'm understanding correctly, to store decommissioned equipment or equipment that needs maintenance. So it's not something these guys have to go through all the time, but more than one person is very spooked by it. There has been recently, I'm not sure how recently, I don't have dates, but within the last 10 years, there was two men, and one in their 30s and one in their mid 40s, that died of heart attacks unexpectedly within a month of each other at work. Just
That's
keeled
weird.
over. Yeah. Oh, this is one of my favorites. This actually I got from a very close source. In the hot strip, there's a section. Now, mind you, again, I've never been inside the mill. They don't let outsiders in there. So I'm trying to describe something secondhand that was described to me, and I'm really sorry if I'm butchering it.
Welcome to oral history.
Right? But, like, I don't want to mess this up. So,
I believe in you.
uh, in the hot strip, there's a section where the guys that run the speeds sit. And so there's two speeds operators and an assistant roller. And these job titles make sense to them. I couldn't describe them to you, so I'm really sorry. I can ask if anybody's curious. One of the guys who was the assistant roller, where he sits to be able to keep an eye on everything for his job, is separated from the two speeds operators by a wall of monitors. And all these guys, they spend 8 to 16 hours at a time working together on a crew 5 and 6 days a week. And so they're close, and guys are guys. The assistant roller was on an overtime shift, so he had been there for 8 hours already, and he was working a second 8 hours. He's tired, and he thought that one of the speeds operators was getting up and messing with him, like hovering over his shoulder, just getting close to him, trying to scare him, keep him awake, just messing with him. But the speeds operator hadn't gotten up out of his chair, hadn't moved. And so the assistant roller looked up, and I guess he went sheet white, and he actually had to leave that area of work, like go do something else, because there was a dark figure standing in the pulpit with him right over his shoulder, and it wasn't one of the other two guys in the box.
No, thank you.
Yeah, right? Like I'm getting
I'd get up
goosebumps
and
talking
leave
about
too.
that one. Yeah, so apparently he spent quite a bit of time out the rest of that night. And I can't say I blame him on that one.
Nope, not at all.
So in that same, while we're in the hot strip there, in that pulpit area, in the finishing mill on the hot strip, on a midnight turn. So I don't know if I explained this before, but the steel mill runs 24/7. So they run 3 shifts, and there's a day turn, which is roughly 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. And I believe it's actually like 7:30 to 3:30, but I could be wrong. And then there's a 3 p.m. to midnight shift, and then there's a midnight to 7 a.m. shift. And this runs 24/7. The only time that they don't have full crews of guys out there, I believe, are Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And even then, they still have a skeleton's crew running. So in the finishing mill on a midnight turn, there are roughly 16 monitors in the pulpit. And these two guys, they're up there talking, they're coworkers, they're in between bars of steel that they're running and finishing and telling each other stories and stuff. And they got on the topic of ghost stories. One of the guys finishes telling his ghost story or comes to a point and he goes, just like that, and snaps his fingers. Every monitor in the pulpit turns off at the same time.
Oh, no, thank you.
And they couldn't get him to come back on.
Oh, no, thank you.
Right? Yeah, I was like, no way.
Well, I mean, at least the ghosts are cooperative and thematic.
Oh my goodness, I was like, talk about some drama. They couldn't get the monitors to turn back on. They can't run the steel mill without the finishing mill running. So, like, everything would have to be shut down. So they get the electricians up there, and the electricians start looking at everything. They found that the main breaker for the whole pulpit had been flipped. So they were able to get it turned back on, but we're talking an industrial breaker. It's not like your house breaker. It's one of the big ones. They don't just flip, especially when they weren't actually running something.
Yeah.
And they don't flip on cue.
No.
So I loved that. I was like, oh my goodness. At least you have cooperative ones up there. Then, let's see. Oh, again, I've never been there. I can't really, I don't have personal experience to describe off of, so I'm really sorry if I'm butchering this. This happened in the basement under the reheat furnace, which actually is also where in December of 2020 the fire happened. So under the reheat furnace, maintenance workers had to go down in the furnace basement. Apparently this is a pretty regular thing. They do maintenance down there on a regular basis. It's these furnaces are melting steel at up to 1800 or 2000 degrees. They have to be maintained regularly. And as we talked about, some of these furnaces and the generators are older and they take good care of them. The hallway down there is about 15 feet, maybe a little bit more wide. So there's no reason to have a hall monitor down there. But these three guys, they go down in this basement hallway, and there's a man sitting on a bench in a burner's jacket. And the burner's jackets are orange safety jackets that they wear that'll, like welder's jacket, but they're bright orange. They're a safety issue to be visible, and they're also to keep sparks from lighting these guys up. So there's an employee sitting on a bench in this wide hallway, like he was a hall monitor, that they would keep hall monitors out there, keep an eye on narrow spaces when there's hot stuff coming through and traffic coming in and out. But again, this was not an area that really needed a hall monitor. It was kind of weird. They didn't think anything of it. All three of them greeted the guy. He was kind of quiet, didn't say anything back. Older gentleman, they just kind of left him to his business. In the course of the maintenance, 2 more different workers had to come down, and they both saw the guy sitting on the bench. So a total of 5 different men saw this hall monitor sitting there. They finished the maintenance in this furnace basement, and they come back up through the hallway. There's no bench. There's no monitor. There's no marks on the dust on the floor that there had ever been a bench or a hall monitor.
The bench is gone?
There was no bench, no man, no marks in the dust.
Oh, that's weird. I don't like that.
All 5 of them saw him. All 5 guys saw him.
Oh, that's weird and creepy.
Right? But you also have to remember, I mean, there are generations of men that have worked out there, and women that have worked out there, and a lot of them have 35, 40, 45 years in. These guys dedicate their life to making
Mm-hmm.
steel, to the point where some of them
Don't
don't even have a
Some of
family.
them also don't leave, apparently.
Those are the ghost stories that I know of. I was hoping to talk to a couple other guys before recording this, but it just didn't work out. And I'm sure if we get more stories, I'm sure I could talk Amanda into a quick "Let me tell more ghost stories" episode
Oh,
too.
of
So
course. I will always let you tell the ghost stories.
I love these. I don't know. There was something about these that just
Well,
got
I
me.
love it that all the stories are like people messing around with other people or just kind of hanging out, making sure everything's safe. It's nothing evil or
Hmm.
destructive. It's just, yeah, it's fun and it's just guys palling around with each other.
These are good blue collar guys. And so the only other thing that I found when I was doing my digging, and I'm circling back here. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna try to end this on an uplifting note since I really brought us all down at the beginning. In my digging, I found a copy of the May 1959 Armco Operator magazine. And a company named Midpoint Digital Archives had this copy on their website. And it was really cool. It was 16 pages and it was full of photos and notes about people, helping people, community working together, pictures of all of their Founders Day activities. There was a feature on the equipment inspector. There's a feature on workers that were promoted that month. There was an article, a short article about a new water pump that brought water over the mountains to the steel mill at one of the plants down in Kentucky. There was a whole article on their women's bowling league. And then the back page was a note on the dangers of inflation threatening our national and personal security. I just loved that there was this whole, apparently they did this monthly magazine back when it was Armco Company that just basically was like, look, guys, here's our workers. You guys are freaking awesome.
That's cool.
I loved it. It was so neat. So, yeah, I told you we would do AK Steel Mansfield. Cleveland Cliffs Mansfield. Gosh darn it.
I wish I was there to like
Cleveland
snap a
Cliffs.
rubber band on your wrist every time you did that.
Okay, in my defense, the majority of my life it has been
That's
AK
fair.
Steel. It is most definitely Cleveland Cliffs now, not AK Steel. Just my blonde roots are showing. I'm sorry. Oh, so that's my story, and I'm sticking
Well, as
to
long
it.
as you're sticking to it, I think we can say, please be safe, don't trespass, be decent people, all that jazz.
Yeah, definitely do not go to the steel mill. They have security guards. It is a working business.
Yeah,
They will
just
not
kind
like
of
you.
drive by and wave that if you go to visit. That's about all you can do.
Actually, anybody that has driven down Route 30 going through Mansfield has seen AK Steel Mansfield. It's off to. Oh, shoot! I forgot one of the coolest
Oh no!
stories. Oh no, Amanda!
Okay, do it!
I forgot one of the coolest stories. So, as I was talking about at the beginning here, Ricky, Roseland County Correctional Facility, and Mancy, which is the big prison, are on the opposite side of the property from AK Steel Mansfield. My brother has worked out at AK Steel now for, I think, 7 years, going on 8 years. And twice since he has worked out there, when he initially was hired in, he worked in shipping. There is a dedicated shipping dock that backs up to railroad tracks. And you can see from Google Maps the amount of steel coils out there to be loaded on trains. And so my brother was working on an afternoon turn, so that 3 o'clock to midnight turn. He's driving one of the massive loaders out there, which are enormous excuses of forklifts that can load these coils of steel on the trains. He turns his loader around and he sees a line of men coming through the shipping yard with AR-15s and full fatigues. An inmate from Mancy had been tracked by dog across the swampy areas of the AK Steel property. The Mansfield SWAT team came in and swept the mill to see if this inmate was hiding
Oh,
there.
that's fun.
Right? Like, what would you do? Especially my brother's an Army vet. He's Army infantry vet. So I was like, how did you react? He's like, well, I mean, got out of their way. Like, what do you mean, how do you react? That's wild.
Like,
so apparently that has also happened a second time since he's been there, but he didn't personally witness it.
That's freaky on a whole other level.
Anyway, what I was saying that brought that up, if you've driven through Mansfield on Route 30 and you have seen AK Steel Mansfield, it's visible from Route 30. It's right near the Ohio State Reformatory, Ricky and Mancy. So.
And then I don't know how much extra content we'll have on this one, probably the YouTube video, maybe a map location, but we'll figure out a couple things.
There's some cool Google photos from 1915 that showed the steel mill, the 50s. So I'm sure we can put links up to those.
Yeah. So check out our website for those. And then if you have any additional stories from AK Steel or what is it, Cleveland Cliffs now?
Cleveland Cliffs, any of the mills. It doesn't have to be Mansfield. Please tell us, because there was a lot of research that I did specifically on the Mansfield plant that I saw different accidents, fatalities, and stories from several of the Middletown plant, the Dearborn plant, Ashland, Kentucky plant. So we would love to hear any of them on any topic, not just steel mills.
Any topic.
Teaser. What's our next one?
Our next one actually no longer exists.
What?
Our next one is not the Mansfield Reformatory, the Ohio State Penitentiary.
Ooh. So
this one we can go visit, technically, or I have visited several times, but the building itself no longer exists. There's an arch. If you've ever been to the Arena District outside Nationwide Arena, there's that big stone arch that's out there. That's the only remaining structure from the penitentiary. So we will be covering that massive thing and everything that goes with it.
Hello?
Hello?
Oh, there you are.
I'm here.
My phone just did something really weird. Why, when you start talking about spooky stuff, does my phone be like, hey, you don't need to be talking to Amanda anymore?
Because it's trying to protect you.
Apparently. Sorry. Anyway, continue.
Oh, I was done.
All right. Send us your stories, and we will see you next time.
We will see you next time. This has been A&A Tall Tales, an independently written, recorded, and produced podcast. Our intro sounds are Crackling Fireplace by Julius H. and Night Woods by Widget Studios. Our intro song is Harmonica Solo by Julius H. This podcast is intended for entertainment purposes only.